I knew something was wrong the moment my grandfather's dirt road ended at a stone gate that cost more than his entire old hunting cabin. The envelope from the estate attorney was still on the passenger seat, cream paper, black ink, my name printed clean across the front like inheritance could ever be clean. I had driven 30 miles from town with the windows down, following memory more than GPS, expecting pine trees, red clay, cow pasture, and the narrow track where Grandpa Samuel used to let me steer his old Ford when my feet could barely reach the floorboard. Instead, my tires rolled off gravel and onto fresh asphalt so smooth it felt like the land had been paved quiet. Ahead of me stood 2 stone columns, bronze letters, trimmed hedges, security cameras, and a sign that read Ashford Pines Estates, residents only. For a second, I just sat there with my hand on the steering wheel and the smell of pine sap coming through the window, trying to make the picture fit the place in my head. It would not. 1,000 acres do not vanish by accident. A camera above the gate turned toward my truck with a soft mechanical whir. Then a woman in a white blazer stepped from the shade of the guard kiosk holding a tablet and a handheld radio. Carolyn Bexley. I did not know her name yet, but I knew her type before she opened her mouth. Polished hair, pearl earrings, smile sharp enough to trim hedges, and the calm posture of someone who had mistaken control for ownership. Behind her, beyond the gate, I could see curving streets, big houses with matching stone mailboxes, a clubhouse roofline, and the glitter of water where Grandpa's cow pond used to catch sunset light. My stomach tightened. That pond had a rope swing once. My sister Nora fell into it wearing church shoes when she was 9, and Grandpa laughed so hard he dropped his fishing pole. Now it had a walking trail, black lamp posts, and a little sign that probably called it a private lake amenity. Carolyn tapped on the glass of my driver's window with 2 fingers. I rolled it down slowly. "Sir, this is a private homeowners association community," she said. "You are trespassing." The word hit colder than it should have. Trespassing. On Mercerland. I looked past her at the asphalt, the gate, the manicured grass covering ground my grandfather had paid taxes on for 40 years. In my shirt pocket, I felt the weight of Grandpa Samuel's brass compass, the one he used to carry when he taught me how to read a tree line, a creek bend, a fence post leaning west from winter wind. He used to say land talks, Wyatt, but only if you stand still long enough to hear it. I looked at Carolyn and kept my voice even. "My name is Wyatt Mercer. I inherited this land." Her smile changed, not bigger, not smaller, just colder. "That is not possible." Somewhere behind the gate, a sprinkler hissed across perfect grass, and the sound made the whole thing feel obscene. She lifted her tablet like it settled the matter. "Ashford Pines has owned and maintained this property for years. You need to turn around." I glanced at the bronze sign, the cameras, the polished entrance, then down at the old compass pressing against my chest. They had built a kingdom on my grandfather's ground, and every inch of it was about to learn the difference between a gate and a deed. I did not turn around. I put the truck in park, killed the engine, and let the sudden silence settle between Carolyn Bexley and me. The air outside the gate smelled wrong, too clean in one direction and too honest in the other. Behind me, the old road still held dust, pine needles, and red clay. In front of me, Ashford Pines smelled like cut grass, hot asphalt, irrigation water, and money trying to look natural. Carolyn kept her tablet raised, waiting for fear to do her work. I had seen that look before when developers came into county meetings with renderings so pretty nobody wanted to ask where the boundary lines were. I had spent 6 years as a land survey technician before taking work in utility mapping. And if there was one thing that job taught me, it was this. Paint fades, fences lean, people lie, but recorded land lines leave tracks if you know where to look. I reached into my shirt pocket and wrapped my fingers around Grandpa Samuel's brass compass. The case was scratched, the hinge loose, the glass cloudy at the edges. He gave it to me. When I was 12, after a summer storm knocked down 3 trees along the North Ridge, and he made me help reset fence markers in mud up to my ankles. He said a compass would not make me smarter, but it would remind me to stop guessing. That was Grandpa. No poetry unless it came with work attached. His land was never fancy. 1,000 acres of pine ridge, meadow, creek bed, cow pond, deer trail, blackberry thickets, and one sagging hunting cabin with a tin roof that popped in the sun. He bought the first parcel in the 1960s, then added pieces whenever a neighbor retired, moved, or needed cash before winter. He kept every deed in a metal trunk in the barn, wrapped in oilcloth and labeled with pencil. Mercer North 40. Mercer Creek Bottom. Mercer Ridge Extension. He treated paper like seed corn. Boring until it saved you. My father wanted nothing to do with the place after he moved to Atlanta. My mother said Grandpa was married to that land more than he was married to quiet. But to me, those acres were childhood itself. The slap of screen doors. The smell of cedar smoke. The taste of well water from a dented tin cup. The buzz of cicadas so loud in July it felt like the trees had electricity running through them. When Grandpa died, I thought I was inheriting responsibility, taxes, storm damage, and a road nobody had graded in years. I did not expect a luxury subdivision sitting where his cattle used to cross. Carolyn spoke again, sharper this time. Sir, I need you to leave before I call security. I looked past her at the clubhouse windows shining beyond the gate, at the lake trail curving around what used to be our cow pond, at the neat stone mailboxes lined up like little monuments to somebody else's paperwork. Call whoever you need to call, I said. But I am going to need your full name and the legal basis for claiming this land. Her eyes flicked to the board member inside the kiosk, then back to me. That was the first crack. People with real ownership usually answer simple questions quickly. Carolyn Bexley, she said, president of the Ashford Pines Homeowners Association. This community was developed, sold, and maintained under proper authority. Whose authority? The sprinkler hissed again behind her. The camera above me whirred softly. Carolyn's smile returned, but it did not reach her eyes. You appear to be confused by old family stories. That should have made me angry. Instead, it made me still. Because old family stories were exactly where land thieves hoped the truth would stay. Carolyn did call security, but the guard who stepped out of the kiosk looked less like a man protecting property and more like a man wishing he had taken lunch 5 minutes earlier. He was young, maybe 25, with a radio clipped to his shoulder and a face that kept moving between her tablet and my truck window. I gave him my name, showed him the estate attorney's envelope, and asked for a copy of whatever recorded document placed Ashford Pines inside Mercerland. He looked at Carolyn. Carolyn looked at the camera above the gate. Nobody looked at me. That told me enough for the moment. I backed my truck away from the stone entrance, not because she had won, but because I had learned a long time ago that the first rule of a land fight is do not argue with a gate when the courthouse still has books. I drove the old road east until the asphalt ended and the land started sounding like itself again. Gravel popped under the tires. Pine branches scraped lightly against the passenger side mirror. The air changed from sprinkler water and fresh mulch to sap, damp bark, and the low mineral smell of creek mud. About half a mile from the gate, I found the old service road Grandpa used to call the Mule Cut, nearly hidden by weeds but still there, running behind a line of loblolly pines toward the barn that had survived on the outer edge of the property. The barn leaned south like it was tired of waiting, its gray board sun split, its tin roof patched in 3 colors, but it was still standing. So was the little cattle loading chute. So was the rusted pipe gate with Mercer burned into a wooden plank by my grandfather's own hand. I stopped there and got out. The silence hit me harder than Carolyn's word trespassing ever could. Not real silence. Land is never silent. Grass clicked against grass. A hawk cried. Somewhere over the ridge. The creek moved through the bottomland with a voice I recognized from summers when my hands were smaller and my grandfather's shadow felt taller than any tree. But beneath all that, beyond the pines, came the soft, distant hum of Ashford Pines. Leaf blowers, golf carts, a fountain pump, the luxury sound of people enjoying land they had been told belonged to them. I walked past the barn and climbed the rise where we used to see the cow pond. My boots sank into red clay softened by last night's rain. At the top, I stopped. The pond was still there, but it had been dressed up beyond recognition. A paved walking trail circled it. Decorative lamps stood where cattails used to grow. A little wooden dock reached out over water where Grandpa once taught Nora to bait a hook and told me patience was just another tool if you knew how to use it. Behind the pond, million-dollar houses climbed the slope in clean rows, their windows catching sunlight like polished coins. It was beautiful in the way a stolen watch can still keep time. I pulled the brass compass from my pocket and opened it. The needle trembled, found north, and settled. Grandpa had made me follow bearings across this land when I was a kid, from the Pine Ridge to the creek bend, from the old fence line to the meadow gate. He said the land would never hide from a person willing to walk it. Looking at that pond, that trail, those houses, I finally understood what made my chest feel so tight. They had not just built on acreage. They had painted over memory and charged dues for the privilege. I turned back toward the barn, toward the metal trunk I hoped was still inside, and the compass clicked shut in my hand like a promise. The barn door fought me like it had been holding its breath for 20 years. The lower hinge dragged through dirt, and when I pulled it open, the sound rolled across the empty service road, dry and tired, like a long groan from the land itself. Inside, the air was thick with hay dust, old motor oil, sun-baked wood, and the faint animal smell that never really leaves a working barn no matter how long it sits empty. Light came through the wall gaps, in thin gold blades, cutting across stacked feed buckets, cracked leather tack, rusted tools, and a workbench where Grandpa Samuel had carved measurements directly into the wood with a pocket knife. For a moment, I was 12 again, standing there with muddy knees while he taught me how to sharpen a fence staple without wasting metal. Then my boot hit something solid beneath a canvas tarp. I pulled the tarp back and found the trunk. Green metal, dented corners, brass latch dark with age, Mercer written across the lid in faded white paint. My hands went still before I touched it. Some things do not look important until you understand they are the last people left who can tell the truth. I called Nora before opening it. She answered from her classroom parking lot, wind crackling through the phone. "Tell me you found something," she said. "I found Grandpa's trunk." There was silence on her end, then a soft breath. "Open it." The latch stuck at first. I had to work it loose with the tip of my pocket knife, metal scraping metal, until it finally popped with a snap that made dust jump off the lid. Inside were oilcloth bundles tied with twine, old tax receipts, county letters, plat maps rolled in brown paper, and a black leather notebook swollen from humidity. Grandpa had labeled everything in pencil because ink was too dramatic for him. Mercer Ridge, Cow Pond Parcel, East Meadow, Timber Line. I lifted the first deed bundle and felt the weight of paper that had outlived every person who tried to ignore it. The dates went back decades. Purchase records, boundary descriptions, easement notes, property tax statements paid year after year under Samuel Mercer's name. Nora stayed quiet while I read pieces aloud, her breathing small in the speaker. Then I unrolled the 1978 survey, and the whole barn seemed to narrow around it. Franklin Pike, licensed surveyor, county seal, handwritten notes along the margin. The cow pond, the pine ridge, the meadow, the service road, the creek bed, all inside the Mercer boundary. Not near it. Not beside it. Inside it. I spread the survey across the workbench, using a wrench and 2 horseshoes to hold the corners. My compass sat beside it, brass, against yellowed paper. The needle pointed north while the old map pointed straight at Ashford Pines. That was when a new sound cut through the barn. Tires on gravel, too smooth and too confident to belong to my truck. I stepped to the door and saw Carolyn's SUV rolling slowly up the service road, followed by a smaller HOA security vehicle. She had found the barn. She stepped out with her tablet in one hand and a radio in the other, her white blazer too bright against the red clay and weathered boards. "Mr. Mercer," she called, voice sharp enough to make the swallows stir in the rafters. "You are now entering restricted community maintenance property." I looked back at the open trunk, the deeds, the 1978 survey, and Grandpa's compass holding steady on the bench. Then I looked at Carolyn standing in front of my grandfather's barn, trying to rename it with a sentence. "No," I said, walking into the sunlight with dust on my sleeves and history at my back. "You are standing on Mercer land, and this time I can prove it." Carolyn's face did not change when I said I could prove it, but her hand tightened around the tablet until the black case creaked. The security vehicle idled behind her, its amber light turning slowly on the roof, throwing dull flashes across the barn boards and the red clay. The whole scene smelled like dust, pine sap, and hot engine metal. She took one careful step forward, like the ground had agreed to carry her authority. "Mr. Mercer, old family papers do not override recorded development approvals. Then you will have no problem showing me the recorded deed where Ashford Pines bought this barn, this service road, the cow pond, the ridge, or the meadow." The guard beside her looked down at his boots. Carolyn did not. People like her never look down until the floor disappears. The community has maintained this land for years, she said. We have residents, infrastructure, amenities, and association records. Maintenance is not ownership. I said it quietly, but the words crossed the space between us cleaner than a shout. Behind me, the trunk sat open in the barn with Grandpa's oilcloth bundles spread across the workbench. The brass compass caught a strip of sunlight and flashed once, like the old man himself had winked from the shadows. Carolyn lifted her radio. I am asking you one final time to leave this restricted area. No, I said. I am asking you one first time to stop claiming land you cannot prove you own. That was when Nora pulled up in a dusty blue Subaru, tires crunching fast over the old service road. She stepped out still wearing her school lanyard, hair coming loose from a clip, eyes moving from Carolyn to the security vehicle to me. My sister had always been the practical one. She could spot a bad excuse before most people finished making it. Wyatt, she said, tell me that is the trunk. It is. Carolyn turned toward her. Ma'am, this is an active association matter. Nora walked past her without slowing. Then stay active over there. I almost smiled. She climbed into the barn, saw the 1978 survey, and the look on her face went from worry to something sharper. Grandpa kept everything. Everything that matters, I said. Together, we started photographing and sorting. Deeds by parcel, tax receipts by year, county letters by sender, survey notes by landmark. The barn changed around us. It stopped feeling abandoned and started feeling awake. Every sheet of paper made Carolyn smaller in the doorway. Every county stamp sounded in my head like a nail going into a board. Nora found the first piece that made my pulse slow down instead of speed up, a deed from Miles Grant, the original developer. He had bought only 84 acres along the highway frontage in 1992. 84, not 1,000. Not the cow pond, not the Pine Ridge, not the meadow, not the barn. The legal description stopped at the old utility easement near the road, almost half a mile short of where Ashford Pines had built its clubhouse lawn. I read it twice, then a third time, while the security radio crackled outside. Carolyn was on the phone now, pacing beside her SUV, using words like confusion, unauthorized access, and old records. Old records. She said it like age made truth weaker. Nora pulled another folded marketing brochure from the trunk, yellowed at the corners, Ashford Pines Estate's face. 2. Luxury living among private pines. There on the glossy map was Grandpa's pond, renamed Bexley Lake, the ridge trail, the meadow lots, and the clubhouse view. I laid the brochure beside the deed. One document showed what Miles Grant bought. The other showed what he sold. The difference between them was not a mistake. It was my inheritance. By dawn the next morning, Nora and I had turned the barn workbench into something between a survey office and a family courtroom. The 1978 survey sat in the center, weighted down by horseshoes, Grandpa's brass compass, and a coffee mug with a crack through the handle. Around it were deeds, tax receipts, the Miles Grant purchase record, the old Ashford Pines marketing brochure, and photographs I had taken from the ridge. The barn smelled like coffee, dust, pine boards, and the sharp oil from the old tractor that had not moved in years. Outside, the luxury subdivision was waking up on land it thought it owned. Sprinklers hissed. Golf carts whined faintly beyond the trees. Somewhere near the pond, a maintenance blower started its high, angry buzz. Nora stood with both hands on the table, staring at the 84-acre deed like it might change if she looked away. They built a whole community on a purchase that barely touched the road, she said. Not all of it, I said. Just the part they sold as paradise. That was the part that made my hands go cold. The road frontage, the entrance, maybe a few early lots, those might have been legitimate. But the clubhouse lawn, the lake trail, the tennis courts, the ridge homes, the meadow cul-de-sac, the expensive heart of Ashford Pines, all of it sat beyond the line Miles Grant had ever bought. At 8 o'clock, Franklin Pike arrived in a white survey truck with a cracked windshield, 2 younger crew members, and a face weathered enough to belong on a county plat. He was in his late 70s, tall, narrow, and slow in the way old professionals get when they have stopped wasting movement. He climbed out, looked at me, then looked at the open barn and the survey on the table. Samuel Mercer's grandson, he said. You have his eyes when someone lies about a fence. I handed him the 1978 survey. He did not read it like a man seeing paper. He read it like a man recognizing a voice. His thumb moved over the margin where his own signature had faded brown. "I walked this line with your grandfather," he said. "Pine Ridge to Cow Pond. Pond to creek bed to meadow post. He paid me in cash and peach preserves your grandmother made." The words hit softer than I expected. Nora turned away for a second. Franklin laid the survey flat and tapped the pond marker. "If Ashford Pine's built where you say, we're going to find out before lunch." By 10:30, orange survey stakes began appearing where the HOA never expected color. One went beside the manicured lake trail, pushed into mulch near a bench that faced Grandpa's old cow pond. One went at the corner of the clubhouse lawn, where two residents in tennis clothes stopped mid-conversation and stared. Another went near the decorative stone bridge, another beside the retention pond, another at the edge of a street sign that read Bexley Court. Each stake carried a ribbon that snapped in the breeze like a little flag from the past. I followed Franklin with the compass in my pocket, listening to his equipment beep, watching the younger crew call measurements and mark points. The smell of cut grass mixed with pine sap and hot pavement. Residents gathered slowly, first curious, then uneasy. Phones came out. Curtains moved. A golf cart rolled up and stopped hard when its driver saw Franklin plant a stake 6 feet from the clubhouse patio. By noon, Carolyn arrived in her SUV, board members behind her, face pale beneath perfect makeup. She looked at the orange stakes, then at me. For the first time, she did not tell me to leave. She asked, "What do you think you are doing?" Franklin Pike answered before I could. He drove one more stake into the ground, straightened with a surveyor's patience, and said, "Putting the ground back where it belongs." Carolyn looked at Franklin Pike like he was an old tool someone had forgotten to throw away. But the problem with old tools is they still know exactly what they were made for. Around us, Ashford Pines had gone still in that strange suburban way, sprinklers ticking, golf cart motors humming, residents whispering behind sunglasses and phones. Orange survey ribbons snapped along the edge of the lake trail, across the clubhouse lawn, beside the stone bridge, and down the slope toward Bexley Court. Every bright little ribbon said the same thing without raising its voice. "This ground has a memory." Carolyn stepped closer, tablet pressed to her chest. "This is private community property," she said. "You cannot mark it without authorization." Franklin pulled a folded copy of the work order from his vest and handed it to her. "Authorized by the recorded landowner." Her eyes moved to my name and stopped. I could see her doing the math and refusing the answer. Behind her, a resident in a navy polo asked, "Carolyn, what is going on?" She turned just enough to give him the board president smile, thin and polished. "A temporary survey confusion. Please return to your homes." Nobody moved. Confusion is a weak word when people can see stakes in the flower beds. I reached into the truck and pulled out the estate trunk's black deed binder, the one Nora had built overnight with tabs, copies, and photographs. The leather smelled like old paper and barn dust. Carolyn saw it and immediately lifted her radio. "Security, I need assistance at the clubhouse lawn." "You already have witnesses," I said. "That is better." Her mouth tightened. "You are disrupting residents." "No. Miles Grant disrupted them when he sold land he did not own. Your board disrupted them when it pretended the paper trail did not matter." The name Miles Grant made two board members glance at each other. There it was, the little flicker that tells you someone has heard a name in a room where it should not have been spoken. Carolyn recovered fast. "Ashford Pines has operated here for decades. Deeds from the 1970s do not erase an established community." Franklin looked up from his equipment. "They do when the established community is standing on the wrong side of the line." A few residents murmured. One woman near the trail held her phone lower, her face no longer curious but worried. That was the part one hated. Most of these people were not thieves. They were families who bought homes, paid dues, planted gardens, and believed the people who handed them glossy brochures. I was not there to destroy their lives. I was there because Carolyn and whoever came before her had built their authority on silence, and silence had run out of room. Carolyn must have sensed the crowd shifting because she made the move I expected. She called the county. 20 minutes later, Deputy Ryan Cole pulled up near the clubhouse in a white cruiser dusted from the back road. His body camera blinked red as he stepped onto the grass. Carolyn met him halfway, voice already carrying. "Deputy, this man is trespassing, harassing residents. and placing unauthorized markers on Ashford Pines property. Cole looked at the orange stakes, then at Franklin's survey truck, then at me. Mr. Mercer? Yes, sir. You have documents? I set the black binder on the tailgate and opened it. The metal rings clicked like a lock, turning the right way. Before I handed him a single page, I looked at Carolyn. I want her claim clear while your camera is recording. Cole turned to her. Ma'am, are you saying the HOA owns and controls this clubhouse lawn, the lake trail, the entrance road, and the land currently being surveyed? Carolyn lifted her chin. Yes, Ashford Pines owns and controls the entire developed community inside the gate. I nodded once and slid the first recorded deed from the binder. The paper moved smooth under my fingers. Then we can start with what Miles Grant actually bought. Deputy Cole took the deed from my hand and read it with the slow care of a man who knew property paper could turn a simple call into something much larger. The clubhouse lawn had gone quiet enough for me to hear the fountain at the pond pushing water through its fake stone spillway. Carolyn stood 3 feet away, tablet tucked against her ribs, watching the deputy's eyes move across the legal description. 84 acres, Cole said. He did not say it loudly, but the number moved through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. I placed the Ashford Pines marketing brochure beside the deed on the tailgate. On one side was the land Miles Grant actually bought. On the other was the dream he sold, the pond, the ridge trail, the meadow lots, the clubhouse view, all shaded in elegant green like ink could make theft polite. That brochure was used to sell phase 2, I said. But the deed Grant recorded never included this ground. Carolyn stepped forward. Marketing materials are not title documents. Exactly, I said. That is the first true thing you have said today. A murmur rolled through the residence. Deputy Cole looked at me. What else do you have? Nora handed me the next folder from the truck. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. Tax records, I said, laying them down in order. Samuel Mercer paid property taxes on these parcels every year until his death. The estate transferred them to me. No deed out. No recorded sale. No land lease. No easement granting Ashford Pines the right to build private amenities here. Franklin Pike stepped beside me and unfolded his field notes. My crew verified the 1978 boundary against current ground evidence, he said. Fence remnants, pond line, creek bed, meadow post, ridge bearing. The original calls hold. Cole studied the survey report, then looked toward the orange stakes scattered across the lawn and trail. The body camera kept blinking red, steady as a metronome. Carolyn's voice sharpened. Deputy, residents live here. This is not the place for an amateur land claim. Franklin gave a dry little laugh. Ma'am, I signed the original survey before half this subdivision had a name. That landed harder than he meant it to. The woman near the trail looked at Carolyn. You told us the lake was owned by the HOA. Another resident said, it is in our purchase packet. A man by the tennis court held up his phone. It is on the website right now. Carolyn turned toward them, trying to gather control back into her voice. Please do not speculate. The board will issue a statement. But statements are weak when stakes are in the ground and deeds are on a tailgate. I pulled out the final page, the one Gideon Hale had emailed that morning after Norris sent him the records, a preliminary notice of claim, preserving my rights and demanding that Ashford Pines stop representing Mercer. Land is HOA property. I handed Cole a copy. My attorney is filing this with the county today. Cole read the first page, then looked at Carolyn. Ma'am, based on what I am seeing, this is not a trespassing issue against Mr. Mercer. This is a title dispute, and you need to stop interfering with the survey until a court or county office says otherwise. The words did not explode. They settled. That was worse for her. The security guard shut off his amber light. One board member walked away from Carolyn and started making a phone call. Residents stared at the orange ribbons as if the ground under their polished shoes had just become unfamiliar. Carolyn looked past me toward the old pond, toward the clubhouse reflection in the water, toward the bright stakes marking a truth she could no longer smooth over with a tablet. I picked up Grandpa's compass from the tailgate and closed it in my palm. The needle inside had already found north. Now everyone else was starting to find it too. The next week smelled like printer toner, wet pine needles, and panic dressed up as professionalism. Gideon Hale filed the notice of claim with the county on Monday morning, and by lunch Ashford Pines had pulled half its amenity pages from the website. By Tuesday, residents were forwarding me screenshots faster than Nora could organize them. Private lake access. Exclusive ridge trail. Owner-controlled clubhouse grounds. Protected meadow views. Every glossy phrase pointed back to land that the recorded title never gave them. By Wednesday, Gideon had the old developer file from the county archive, and the name Miles Grant started showing up like a bad stain under fresh paint. Grant had bought 84 acres along the highway frontage, secured early subdivision approvals, then marketed the surrounding Mercer land as if future expansion was already guaranteed. There were memos, planning notes, and one letter from Grandpa Samuel that made my throat tighten when I read it. It was only 6 sentences, typed on an old machine, signed in his heavy hand, and it said plainly that Mercer land was not for sale, not for lease, and not available for Ashford Pines use. He sent it 26 years earlier. They had the warning before the first luxury brochure ever hit a mailbox. Gideon spread the documents across a conference table in his office, a narrow room that smelled like leather chairs and black coffee. Nora sat beside me, arms folded, eyes sharp. Franklin Pike had come too, wearing his feed store cap like a court credential. "This is not just a mistaken boundary," Gideon said, tapping the letter with one finger. "This is a disclosure problem, a title problem, and potentially a fraud problem against the residents as much as against you." That part mattered. It would have been easy to look at those million-dollar houses and see enemies. But I had seen the faces on the clubhouse lawn when Deputy Cole read the deed. Confusion, fear, anger turning in the right direction. Most of them had bought what they were shown. The people who sold it were the ones who needed daylight. By Friday night, Ashford Pines held an emergency resident meeting in the clubhouse that sat on Grandpa's old pasture. The room was packed tight, smelling of raincoats, perfume, polished wood, and coffee nobody was drinking. Carolyn sat at the front table with the board attorney on one side and 3 board members on the other, but the authority she used to wear like a coat did not fit the same anymore. Gideon stood calmly near the projector while the first slide showed the 84-acre deed, then the marketing map, then the 1978 Mercer survey, then the tax receipts, then Grandpa's letter refusing sale or lease. With each document, the room got quieter. Not peaceful, focused. A man in the 3rd row stood up and said his closing packet listed lake access as an HOA-owned amenity. A woman near the aisle said her property value depended on that trail system. Another resident asked why Carolyn had called me a trespasser if the board had known there was a title issue. Carolyn tried to answer with words like legacy assumptions and development continuity, but the phrases fell apart before they reached the back row. Then Gideon placed the final page on the screen, a county acknowledgement that the Mercer claim had been accepted for review and that no further HOA representation of disputed land should be made without disclosure. The board attorney leaned toward Carolyn and whispered something. Her face went still. That was the moment the room understood what she had already figured out. The gate, the clubhouse lawn, the lake trail, the tennis courts, the stone bridge, the prettiest parts of the kingdom were sitting on ground that still carried my grandfather's name in the records. The settlement did not happen with shouting, bulldozers, or anybody being thrown out of a home. That was never what I wanted, and Grandpa Samuel would have called it lazy justice. Real justice has to be measured, signed, recorded, and strong enough to hold after everyone stops watching. It took 4 months of county review, title conferences, resident meetings, and legal pressure before Ashford Pines finally admitted what the paper had been saying all along. The developer had never bought the land under the core amenities. The HOA had no recorded ownership of the pond, the ridge trail, the clubhouse grounds, the meadow road, or the stone bridge. Carolyn Bexley resigned 2 weeks before the final agreement, calling it a personal transition. Nora read that phrase over breakfast and said, "That woman could call a house fire a lighting adjustment." I laughed because it was easier than thinking about how many years she had stood at that gate pretending the bronze letters made her right. The final agreement gave residents protection because most of them had been handed bad disclosures and pretty maps by people they trusted. Nobody lost a home. Nobody had to tear up a garden or move a fence overnight. Ashford Pines signed a long-term land lease for the shared amenities, paid compensation to the Mercer estate, corrected every public disclosure, and removed all claims that the HOA owned land it had never purchased. Miles Grant's old company was pulled into a separate civil claim by residents who wanted answers. The county updated the parcel records. Franklin Pike's survey became part of the official file. Grandpa's 6-sentence letter refusing sale or lease was copied so many times it felt like his voice had finally learned how to echo. The day I replaced the sign at the main gate, the air smelled like cut pine, warm stone, and fresh rain drying off asphalt. The old Ashford Pines bronze letters were still there because I did not need to pretend the community did not exist. I only needed the ground beneath it to tell the truth. Beside the gate, on a new cedar post set exactly on the surveyed line, I mounted a smaller sign with black letters on brushed steel. Mercerland, governed by recorded deed, accessed by legal agreement. I set Grandpa's brass compass on top of the post while I tightened the last bolt. The needle trembled for a second, caught north, and settled. Behind me, the pond glittered through the trees, still wearing its walking trail and black lamp posts, but it looked different now. Not stolen. Accounted for. The residents who passed that morning slowed down, some embarrassed, some grateful, some just quiet. One older man in a golf cart stopped, took off his cap, and said, "Your grandfather deserved better." I looked toward the ridge where the orange survey stakes had once snapped in the wind and said, "So did everybody who was lied to." Later that evening, I drove the old service road back to the barn. Nora was there already, sitting on the tailgate with 2 paper cups of coffee and Grandpa's metal trunk open between us. The sun dropped behind the pine ridge, turning the whole meadow gold. Cicadas started up in the grass. Somewhere beyond the trees, a fountain pump hummed over the cow pond, but this time it did not sound like theft. It sounded like rent being paid on time. I placed the compass back inside the trunk beside the 1978 survey, the tax receipts, the Miles Grant deed, and a copy of the final agreement. Then I closed the lid and rested my hand on the faded Mercer name. They built a kingdom on my inheritance. I did not need to tear it down. I only had to prove where the ground began.